And underlying this
This meeting is being recorded.
Yes, I just heard that it was recorded. So underlying this misperception of a clash between the two is very often an understanding of FoRB as a right that protects religion, and often conservative patriarchal religion. And for some, that means that FoRB is seen as an inherent obstacle to achieving gender equality. For others, that gender equality is a threat to the protection of religious values and practices. But from a human rights perspective, FoRB is not about protection of conservative or patriarchal religious traditions and values. In fact, it's not about protection of religion at all. It's about protecting individuals' right to have, adopt, change, or leave a religion or belief, to manifest and practice this religion or belief alone or in community with others, and to be free from coercion and discrimination on the grounds of their religion or belief. And that obviously also includes women's right to interpret and practice their religion the way they believe is true, even when this goes against the orthodoxy of the religious community. So from this perspective, FoRB is actually an important part of women's rights. Also, FoRB can never be used to justify violations of women's rights or other rights related to gender equality. The right to have or not have a religion or belief can never be limited, but the right to manifest and practice this religion or belief can and should be limited in specific circumstances. Most importantly, when the practices and manifestations of some people violate the rights and freedoms of others. So female genital mutilation, honor killings, and other harmful practices that are purportedly justified in the name of religion are obviously not protected by the right to FoRB. Likewise, no form of gender-based violence can ever be condoned or excused with reference to FoRB. In fact, the state has an obligation to prevent and criminalize such practices. So the relationship between FoRB and gender equality is admittedly not always straightforward. The two sets of rights can and do collide in concrete, specific instances, as many other sets of rights do. But there's no inherent contradiction between rights related to FoRB and rights related to gender equality. And I think that's an important point to bear in mind. Also, while these concrete conflicts there may be between rights related to FoRB and gender equality obviously deserve careful attention, it does seem that the biggest challenges that we are facing today are very often about violations of both FoRB and gender equality, rather than about a clash between the two. Very often, gender-based and religiously based discrimination exist in tandem as sort of parallel discrimination. And in fact, there's research that shows a strong correlation between countries with high restrictions on religion and low protection of gender equality. And in such contexts, women from religious minorities, women who are atheists or humanists, or women whose convictions and practices otherwise differ from those of the majority are often victims of double discrimination. And in most parts of the world, LGBTIQ persons of faith are obviously particularly vulnerable. Discrimination on the grounds of religion and gender often intersect and merge into new and distinct forms of discrimination. So people are not only victims of double discrimination, but triple discrimination. So, for instance, religious discrimination can often affect women from religious minorities in different ways than it affects men from the same minority. And gender-based discrimination can affect women from religious minorities in different ways than it affects women from the majority religion. So the different types of discrimination experienced by religious minority women intersect in complex ways and can result in unique disadvantages that are not easily compared with either those of women from the religious majority or those of men from the same religious minority. And these intersecting forms of discrimination can be particularly devastating in situations of violence and conflict, which is the topic of today. So when religious minorities are discriminated against, oppressed, or persecuted, all members of the community are obviously at risk. But women and girls from religious minority groups are often victims of different kinds of violations than men and boys. So in many cases, gender-based violence is employed as a strategy for elimination or contamination of a community, or as a tool for retaliation and revenge. We can think of China, for instance, where women from the Muslim Uyghur minority are allegedly subject to rape and forced sterilization in the so-called re-education camps. Or we can think of Pakistan, where there have been several examples of women and girls from Christian minority groups being abducted, forcibly converted and married to their abductors as part of a broader strategy to intimidate Christian minority communities. At the same time, dominant patriarchal norms within religious communities, whether minority or majority, mean that the survivors of such gender-based violence often risk additional discrimination from their own community, for instance, in the form of silence, victim blaming, or exclusion. So even oppressed religious minorities can be oppressive themselves, with practices and traditions that run counter to gender equality norms and principles. This was the case, for instance, for many of the Yazidi women and girls who were abducted by ISIS and sold into slavery or forced marriage. For those who were freed, returning to their own communities turned out to be very difficult, because according to traditional Yazidi norms, any sexual contact with non-Yazidis results in banishment from the faith, even in cases of rape. And that meant that many women and girls faced ostracization and exclusion, even from their own family, and the children that were born in slavery were not recognized as part of the community. These are just some of the examples of the complex ways in which discrimination on the grounds of religion and gender intersect in situations of conflict and violence. Now, in all of this, it's important to remember that people who are victims of discrimination are never just victims. Around the world, we see religious minority women, LGBTIQ persons, atheists, and many others who are actively engaged in struggles for equality, security, and dignity for themselves as well as for others. So in the case of the Yazidis, for instance, survivors actually worked together with women's rights activists and religious leaders to challenge and change discriminatory religious norms and practices that prevented their reintegration into the community. And that resulted in the Yazidi spiritual leader issuing an edict clarifying that women who had been enslaved by ISIS should be welcomed back into the community together with their children. For these Yazidi women, as well as for many, many other people, their struggle for gender equality is closely linked with their struggle for religious freedom. They don't want to, and they shouldn't have to choose between one or the other. So to sum up, an insistence on the interconnectedness and interdependency of FoRB and gender equality is not just a question of fluffy human rights norms. If we maintain an antagonistic relationship between the two, it will have very real consequences, not only in terms of legal protection gaps, but also in terms of a lack of attention and sensitivity to the needs, demands, experiences, and specific vulnerabilities of the many millions of people who are discriminated against on the grounds of both religion and gender. And it will result in a lack of support and encouragement to those who fight against these injustices, insisting on their right to both freedom of religion or belief and gender equality. So I will leave it at that and look forward to the discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Marie. That was incredibly concise and thorough. And we're putting in the chat some of the papers that Marie has written that we really would love for you and encourage you to go on to. Yeah, so have a look at those. You can see them. They've just been put up by Rachel just now. So we really do recommend them, particularly the second one, the Promoting Freedom of Religion or Belief and Gender Equality in the Context of Sustainable Development Goals. That's been a paper that's been circulated around the UK FoRB Forum, and we'd encourage you to have a look at that. Marie, thank you for your contribution. And I think just some of the highlights that I just love the clarity of this interconnectedness of these human rights is not just fluffy human rights norms, that this is something that really we need to understand fully, that intersection and basically the specific vulnerabilities that are raised at this. We are really wanting to make sure this webinar is actually a dialogue and has opportunity for questions. So it isn't a one-way approach. So we would really encourage your questions to be added to the chat. And if you have comment, we are not going to be ones that say it has to be a question. We would love your comments on this as well. So if you do have something to say, then do feel free to raise your hand and signal that, or insert a question or a comment into the chat. That would be great. I'd like to see if we have Lily Ashworth with us. Do we have Lily with us? at all?
Here, yes.
Oh, great, Lily. I'd like to welcome Lily. We really wanted to balance out the panel and the participants with this webinar. And Lily is the Advocacy Officer for Humanists International. And so we wanted to give her sort of first opportunity to comment, whilst the rest of you, if you want to, some of you would like to bring questions to Marie, we'd appreciate that. So Marie, you can just have a little breather. We'll just meet Lily for a minute or so, and then we'll open it up before we go on to the next section. So Lily, any sort of additional comments as you heard that you would like to collaborate with? You heard actually that Marie included the rights of humanism or of no belief as such. So yeah, anything you'd like to add to this, or evidence that Humanists International has to support this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Emma, for the opportunity, and to working group for the platform, and thank you to Marie as well for the excellent presentation, covering so much in such a short amount of time. Yeah, just picking up on a few of the points that were highlighted, I think absolutely right to highlight the tendency for there to be seen FoRB and gender equality to be seen as rights in opposition, as inherently clashing. And we often see that narrative being exploited for specifically political purposes. I think as humanists and human rights activists, we think it's really important to challenge this notion that these are rights in opposition, and to emphasize the intersectionality of rights as well. So I also found the comments about double and intersecting forms of discrimination also resonate as well. From the humanist perspective, I can give a few examples of how discrimination on the basis of one's gender and on the basis of one's belief can be compounded. So as a woman humanist, as a woman non-believer, it's often much harder to voice one's lack of belief, particularly in a religious society or community, because the backlash that tends to be faced by women who do so is more severe, because of patriarchal and cultural norms, which sometimes have an expectation or an encouragement of men to be free thinking, to be critical, whereas women who do the same thing might be seen as turning their back on their community. So there's this kind of strong social pressure to conform for women, and this makes it quite difficult for them to take the steps to come out of the closet, so to speak. And it's these same patriarchal norms, in fact, that control women's right to believe and identify how they want, that also seek to deny them the right to make informed choices about their lives and their bodily autonomy. So kind of these are all related forms of oppression. Another important way that humanists experience double discrimination also arises from the kind of nature of humanist belief, and that kind of one of the core principles and beliefs in humanism is that people should have the right to be able to explore their kind of sexuality and gender identity. For humanists, this is kind of a very inherent part of their belief system, as you will. And so for humanists to advocate for kind of LGBTI issues and sexual and reproductive rights, they often do so against kind of dominant or mainstream views. And so laws that curtail the rights of LGBTI people and curtail sexual and reproductive health and rights are not only a violation of equality, but also of freedom of religion and belief for humanists. So I think that ties in a little nicely with the point about how FoRB is so closely kind of intertwined, interrelated with other human rights.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lily, and to bring that strength of this message across, and that's what I've really appreciated about being part of the UK FoRB Forum, that we're multiple stakeholders. I mean, just within the Gender and FoRB group, we've got Renee Cassin, the Rights Practice Tier Fund, obviously Humanists UK, and it's actually bringing those voices together that brings that collaborative approach. So thank you. I'm just going to just put some questions in if you'd like to, or any comments that you'd like to share, but I'm going to read one comment that one section of the Declaration of Humanity by leaders of faith and leaders of belief, which really links to what Marie has just shared and in this section. It said, based on our fundamental belief that all persons have innate human dignity and value, we condemn utterly all acts of conflict-related sexual violence towards any person person at any time and in any circumstance, and will encourage those under our care and others in the community to do the same. And so that's, it also says we will do all in our power to prevent conflict-related sexual violence and protect all persons vulnerable to such violence, including marginalised minority groups and those of other faiths or belief, recognising the adherence to a faith or belief can itself result in additional vulnerability. So that supports everything that we've just heard so far. So now is time for your voice. We really do welcome people's contribution here. So is there anyone who would like to add anything? While you're thinking of that, Marie, is there anything you'd like to add at the moment in response to Lily, or while we look for any questions or comments?
Well, actually, I just would like to hear, it's a little bit off topic, but how you see current developments in terms of including the B in FoRB promotion, because to me it seems that in recent years that there has been much more focus on the non-believers, the atheists, the humanists, and many others. But I would be really interested in hearing, like, how do you see this? Do you also experience this? Are you included more than before, or do you still see a long way to go on this?
I think, that's an interesting question. I joined the organization kind of at the point at which I think there have been things have been a bit better in terms of including the B in belief. And I think the UK in particular has been quite good at, giving humanists an equal platform to other religions and beliefs. I can't really speak for the situation in different countries. I'm not so close to it there, but I think that overall there has been, with the change of administration in the US as well, I think we see some positive kind of trajectory towards a greater inclusivity in kind of interfaith, interbelief dialogues. And I think one of the key things about that has been getting the kind of pushing for FoRB, for all, and FoRB Article 8 and understandings along kind of Article 18 and a human rights-based understanding of FoRB. Yeah. So I'm I feel quite positively about it.
Thank you. That's good to hear, Lily. And certainly, I think we've, as someone who adheres to one of the major religions, as a Christian, we are always wanting to, certainly within the UK FoRB Forum, we're educating one another, in language and inclusivity and things like that, and also just understanding that, just different backgrounds, even to discussing around gender. So, and that's really important to understand. So, yeah, thank you. Thanks for that question, because it is as relevant in this, and particularly when you're looking across gender, Marie, it's very important. So, right, is there any comments or questions that anyone would like to bring to the fore right now at all? We can't see any in the chat yet.
I can ask a question as well, if no one else had questions that they wanted to get in on.
Yeah, just look. And is there any? I can't see the group, so if there's any hand holding or hands up, I can't see that at the moment. So I'll rely on my team to point out anything. Okay, well, Lily, why don't you go ahead with your question while people are warming up for this?
Yes, please, encouraging everybody to add their voice to the conversation.
Yeah,
that would be great to hear from you. My question was simply whether, Marie, you've come across some examples of good practices or initiatives that advance kind of FoRB and gender issues at the same time, in politics or in education or in other kind of forum like that.
Well, actually, that was part of the report that that Emma just mentioned, was a result of an expert consultation process that we ran 2 years ago, together with the Stefanos Alliance from Norway and sponsored by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Danish and Norwegian governments. And that in that process, we tried to bring together experts on gender equality and experts on FoRB, precisely to explore these intersectionalities and to point to some good practices. So the report has quite a few concrete examples of how to work with these two sets of rights. Not as many as as I would have hoped. I think there really is a need for much more focused attention to this. But I think the expert consultation process in itself was actually an example of how rewarding it can be to bring together advocates from the different parts of the human rights advocacy field, because that is also quite rare. Like just bringing people together, and I was surprised at how little each side perhaps knew about the other side. And encouraged by the fact that everyone was so interested in learning more from each other. So that in itself was I think a good example of an initiative.
Thank you, Marie. Marie, I would like to just welcome Portia in, and Portia is director of the APPG, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Freedom of Religion or Belief. And Portia, would you like to just explain a little bit about how this theme's emerging, and just, you know, even the fact that we had a debate in Parliament on the 17th of March about gender and FoRB, you know, is it because the voices are just getting louder, or is people seeing the relevance of this across, you know, both for men and for women? Over to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Emma. And yeah, 100%. I think there is definitely an increasing awareness of gender being at the forefront of many FoRB issues and FoRB debates. So we had the debate in Parliament on that. And there was the intersectionality in various countries and how these vulnerabilities are doubled. More's the pity, unfortunately, but at least it is on the FCDA's radar. And I think something which is encouraging, at least in that regard, is that with the upcoming ministerial planned for the UK to host in the summer, there's various sessions organised for all of these different delegations from international countries coming to the UK to discuss this, and FoRB will at least be given priority. Hopefully, like more than one hopes, because there can never be enough on this important issue. But there is definitely a designated time for gender and FoRB and the intersection of the two. So I think that is at least shows that the FCDO is taking it seriously, and it is definitely being noted by MPs as an up and coming issue, and you can't tackle one without the other in many cases.
Great, thank you very much for that. And it's good to see and keep an eye on. So thanks for that contribution, Portia. Great. Okay, let's just say again, I'm just looking at the chat. Any other comments from the group, or we can move on to our next section. Anything else to say? Again, I will just check. And yes, we've got one from Gillian. So Gillian, I will see if I can read that one. And Gillian, yeah, I'll read that out, and then we'll see if we can get a response, because I know that Marie's already added something, but it'd be good to see. As most holy books and theological interpretations have been undertaken by men, regardless of which religion and belief, the understanding behind all beliefs is deeply discriminatory against women. What more can we do to address that imbalance? Now we're going to look at that in the next section as well, but Marie, anything other to add other than what you've added in the chat that you'd like to say, and then we will move on to that. Gillian, you've actually led us very well into the next section.
No, I just wrote in the chat that I think what we have to do obviously is to really encourage and do whatever we can to support the many feminist religious scholars and thinkers that are all over the world, who are engaged precisely in interpreting their religion from a gender-sensitive perspective. And I think there are many very strong organizations and actors and institutions that do precisely that. I just mentioned Musawa and the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians as two obvious examples of this.
Brilliant, thank you. And we will we'll look those up and see if we can get links into the chat as well to help that, or you can do that as well for us, Marie. Thank you. Right, I would like to thank you very much, Marie, for joining us. We were so delighted you can. And so are you able to stay with us at all and listening? Brilliant, that's great to you. So I'd like to move on to our second section. So for those of you who are watching the numbers might fluctuate slightly if people are coming and going during this lunchtime, if you're in the UK at GMT, but obviously we've got people across Europe, North America, and across to Asia, and we've got some I've already seen a couple of people from Liberia and Nigeria as well, and we would really like to welcome all. So our second section is really looking at building positive gender identities around peace building and conflict. And we wanted to make sure that we're not dwelling on the fact that people are victims, but they have agency, and they have agency to be a part of change. So you'll find that coming through for the next section. And I'd like to introduce Sharon Rosen, and she is part of Search for Common Ground, and she is the Global Director of Religious Engagement there. She's worked and has been living in Jerusalem for the last 40 years, and has an incredible contribution to bring. We can give you all sorts of links to her work as well. But she's Search for Common Ground is the world's leading non-governmental organisation dedicated to peace building, and she has been a facilitator in conflict mediation and transformation, strategic planning and capacity building for religious reconciliation. So we're really, really pleased that she can join us. So Sharon, I'd love to hand over to you and hear your contribution. So you're extremely welcome.
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you for inviting me to speak about these interlinking hot topics, conflict, gender, and religious freedom, and also to focus on concrete examples of how we can build positive gender identities in conflict situations. As we know, religion can be both a force for peace and it can be used to justify violence. Religion is a profound identity marker for millions of people, if not billions, and it can be easily manipulated in times of conflict to advance a viewpoint of you're either with us or against us. This is true of conflicting identities within religions, between secular and religious actors, and also between genders. And these tensions are played out particularly during times of uncertainty and instability, in times of fear and conflict, which all too often lead to violence, as we're seeing in the world. Well, actually, we see it all the time in the world, but particularly now with this war going on in Europe. Traditionally, most religions, like most of our cultures over thousands of years, have been patriarchal in character, with men holding positions of authority and excluding women as leaders in the public domain. But conflicts around gender usually reflect the place of a society on the continuum between tradition and modernity. And so we see these differences in Europe, as opposed to many of the places where we work in Search, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. All religions interpret sacred texts. If we engage the traditionalists where they are, build trust, and at the same time offer new ways of looking at these sacred texts, the more likely we will be able to enable new understandings on gender roles. And so as time is short, I want to see how gender and religious freedom could be advanced to promote peace in times of conflict by sharing some information about two initiatives that can provide some insights into how this can be done that do not focus on calling out governments that abuse human rights or condemn the growing religious nationalism we're seeing in various countries. I'm not saying that we mustn't call them out. Of course, these concerns need to be publicly highlighted. But also in many places around the world, this calling out often creates an antagonism, or at best is ignored. So we need to look at effective ways of bringing about change. The initiatives I want to talk about insist on three principles. inclusion, collaboration, and results in the desire to advance common interests where possible. First of all, I've been directing a fascinating project in Israel over the past 6 years with influential religious actors, male and female, national religious Jews, and Muslims who generally identify with the Islamic movement. The overall purpose of the project is to expand constituencies of peace among deeply religious communities who are perceived as stumbling blocks to a negotiated peace agreement of the Arab-Israeli conflict. In this project, we focus on how religious leaders can be part of the solution and not the problem. Through listening and learning from one another within their intra-religious groups, and then with those from the other faith, the participants discuss sacred texts dealing with the core issues, sanctity of life and land, attachment to Jerusalem, relationship with the other, and they develop a religious language which forms the basis for recommendations on how to advance peace politically. The leaders are now implementing practical activities to expand peace in their communities, such as joint lectures to religious audiences, a media platform run by the participants themselves, and the creation of a curriculum for religious institutions. And they're also working on women's groups and more implementations. But here I want to focus on the gender tensions that almost blew up the initiative. One of the guiding principles of Search for Common Ground is the principle of inclusion. We find that including a wide variety of views is an effective way to advance positive change. So we aim to recruit equal numbers of men and women. Our Muslim group leader, a male, said there were no female Muslim religious leaders, or he couldn't find them. So keeping to our principles, we recruited deeply religious women who are leaders in other fields, education, social work, or the law. We had no problem recruiting female Jewish leaders, the heads of religious seminaries, university departments, and the like. But what happened is that it led to different levels of religious knowledge between the sides. As a result, the Muslim women asked us to provide separate classes for them to learn more about Sharia law or interpretations of jihad or attitudes towards war, peace, minorities in majority countries. Gender tensions simmered during our first 3 years of this project, but the crux came when the Muslim and Jewish women asked to hold separate gender meetings to discuss texts without the men present. Our male group leaders, religious leaders, became suspicious, thinking there was a feminist agenda, and insisted on being present to hear what was being discussed. Rather than battle this head-on, which threatened to explode the project, we agreed that the two male group leaders could attend the meetings, but as observers only. After the first meeting, the men stopped coming. Their fears were allayed. They saw that the women were not plotting to take over. They simply wanted the intimacy and the opportunity to discuss the texts in their own way while continuing with joint meetings as well. The Muslim and Jewish women in general proved to be the most committed participants in the project and are now highly influential in promoting peace in their communities. And here are a couple of examples. There's Aziza, the charismatic Muslim lawyer, dressed in her hijab and long coat, whose harsh words against Jewish political and social oppression when we first met ring in my ears, and who by the third year of the project had developed profound relationships with national religious women, was presenting joint lectures to religious audiences, and was learning Sharia law so that she had the religious language to discuss issues at the heart of the conflict more confidently with her Jewish counterparts and with the Muslim male religious leaders in the group. So she now has the confidence to stand up to the double discrimination she was feeling as a member of a minority religion in a Jewish majority Israel and as a Muslim woman within Islam. And then there's Noah. a young national religious Jewish woman from Lod, who gave birth to her third child 3 weeks before the eruption of violence in that mixed Arab-Jewish town in May of last year. And despite her fragile health and the dangerous security situation, she insisted on finding ways to sustain neighborly contact during the violence. And she's become a leader in her town, regularly giving joint lectures together with another participant of ours, a male Muslim municipal council leader from the neighboring mixed town of Ramla, on the contrasting ways their towns deal with conflict for good and bad, and on a possible way to build social cohesion. And now Noah is even starting her own initiative with our support to create an interreligious forum in Lod that will hopefully minimize the chances of another explosion of violence in the future. I don't know if I've got time for just another paragraph, but I just want to mention that Search is also a member of a consortium of secular and faith-based non-governmental organizations called JISRA, the Joint Initiative for Strategic Religious Action, funded by the Dutch government. And JISRA is a 5-year freedom of religion or belief lobby and advocacy initiative in 7 countries, ranging from Iraq to Indonesia and various conflict regions in Africa, and comprises 50 civil society organizations across these 7 countries. The purpose is to support the capacity of religious actors to engage in dialogue and to build interreligious respect for FoRB, and to support its advocacy nationally and internationally. General cross-cutting processes such as intra-religious text study and inter-religious dialogue leading to joint action are taking place. But there's a very specific focus on strengthening the voices of women and youth and engaging them in decision-making processes at all levels. We're at the early stages of this initiative, but we have started some workshops, for example, in Kenya, to assist our partners in understanding the impact of gender dynamics on peace building and to provide techniques on how to engage female religious actors. So what's clear, and this is my last sentence, is that if we want to promote gender and FoRB in conflict areas, the common ground approach, that's to say inclusion, empathizing with people's fears, building trust and promoting collaboration is key to reaching the results we're aiming for. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I think just like Marie, we would love to hear more, but it's fascinating, and I'm really pleased you mentioned JISRA because I believe that some of those are part of a delegation coming over from the Ministerial in July, of which we'll let people know if they can come and be part of events where they'll be speaking at. So thank you so much. It's so good. We're full of activists and actors here, and it's really good to hear tangible results. So we really appreciate that. I'd like to go straight over to a recording we've got from Helen Fisher. She is the gender specialist for Open Doors. She had to do a pre-record for us. So we're going to listen to her because, again, it supports this, this challenge, which again is in the Declaration of Humanity, that we need to work to dismantle harmful interpretations of faith or belief and harmful cultural norms that may be used to condone or commit acts of violence. And we'll hear from Helen, and then we'll go over to hear from Luke Martin from Tear Fund, who's also got an initiative that we'd love to share about. So we'll listen to Helen and then over to Luke. Thank you.
Hello and greetings to the distinguished panelists and guests. It is a privilege and pleasure to be speaking with you today. The theme for my section is faith-based learning to positively transform gender norms and support greater inclusion, equality, and peace. Our organization has been on a real journey over the past 5 years, and I'd love to share with you 3 things. Basically, how we as a faith-based organization came to the point of engaging at all in a discussion of gender norms, what we found as a framework for addressing those norms from our community's sacred text, and then finally just a little bit about how this framework is starting to transform not just mindset, but approaches to programming and actions. I hope you're all familiar with the gender-specific religious persecution research reports, which World Watch Research has been putting out for the past 5 years. This is our most recent one from just last month. They're available for you at this website, all 5 of them, including a separate one on children and youth-specific religious persecution. These are reports that are actually allowing us to have conversations at a real granular and sociocultural level that we had never been able to really have numbers and statistics for before. Back in 2018, we first came up with this observation about the fact that men and women's religious persecution looked so different. Women's being characterized as being violent, hidden, and complex. And that hidden word is so important because it tells us we have a lot of work to do. We come up with these by using a system of 32 pressure points of specific religious persecution. You can find all the methodology on that. And this year, because it is our 5th year of doing this, we feel a tremendous amount of confidence in saying, well, these patterns and these trends that we have been identifying, they are based on these very static gender norms that you find in societies which create vulnerabilities. Those create vulnerabilities that tell us where those, what we would call external arrows of attack, are coming from. What are they targeting in the men and the women of the church? We've identified these 4 areas that you will recognize as being very typical of men's and women's gender roles in a lot of societies. In fact, we could say that GSRP attacks our strengths. However, we have to ask ourselves as a faith-based organization, are these really what we think are our strengths? Well, if we agree that these areas are what give a man and a woman value, purpose, and acceptance in our community, and actually gender-specific religious persecution is highly effective against us because it's very easy to destroy these areas of identity. So we've looked deep into our community's sacred text, which you will know is the Bible, and we've come up with these 3 sets of restoration workshops. They have looked and reframed the way that we are understanding some of the founding stories in those texts, those what we would call the Old Testament and the New Testament. And we're looking at them in terms of 5 identity areas of human beings. These 5 identity areas of human beings, we would say, were established at the very beginning, but then things fell apart very quickly and relationships became characterized by these dysfunctional areas. Now, these 5 dysfunctional relational habits you might recognize as being those which actually make attacks of gender-specific religious persecution more painful, more destructive, especially that blame and shame element that's in it. They're what make sexual attacks or economic harassment so devastating in a community. But if we can frame those as things that were not intended, then we can, and if we can draw on the faith narrative to say, well, actually back in Genesis 1 and 2, and then again in the first 4 books of the New Testament, you find these 5 relational characteristics as being the standard, then we can apply those words to what might be gender norms in society and ask some questions. Well, how does that apply to how we would like to view the individuals of our communities? Now, even if you don't come from the same faith or belief background, these 10 words might speak to you, and perhaps you can think of where you can draw on those in your own faith narrative. Well, how are we using these? I'd like to give you a very rough model that we started using. It's a 3-tree model. And the first one is what we have as our typical, our kind of classic understanding of religious persecution, and also of the kinds of programs that we often give funding to, or maybe the advocacy work that we do, that will focus on a lot of the practical needs. But what we've just been talking about, and what we talk about as practitioners and experts in this sort of community, is acknowledging that there is a ripple of damage, and it used as what we might call a distorted local faith actor response. We need to acknowledge this because most of the time we act as if it doesn't actually exist, as if this is the tree of the faith-based organization that we're working with or group. But I think we know that that's not the reality. The reality is that we have to deal with this. And in fact, we have started labeling this a tree of vulnerability and the other one a tree of resilience. The great news in here is that this is inside our faith community, and therefore it's where we have the most agency, and it's where we can draw on those sacred texts. It's where we can talk about what exactly our socio-theological view is and how we operate. Well, we've been so encouraged by the success that this has been meeting, the outcomes as we've done feedback surveys, and participants have affirmed that the workshops have opened their understanding to vulnerabilities and clarified for them why it's important to talk about women's rights. Most importantly, though, it has given them the biblical permission that they need to review programming with a gender lens. So I hope this is an encouraging thing about how all of those who are local faith actors can counter shame narratives. And I hope that we can have further conversations on this in the future. Thank you so much for your time today.
That is great that we can hear from Helen. Sorry she couldn't join us personally, but she has presented before at the UK FoRB Forum, and she'll be available, I think, in the summer as well. She'll come and join us at the Ministerial. So you can see there's some really key tools there. Again, I was looking through the lens of people with belief without maybe a sacred text, but still seeing very similar themes coming through. And Lily, you can comment on that maybe towards the end of this time together. We're going to hear from Luke now. So Luke, are you ready with your web your PowerPoint? And I'd love to introduce Luke Martin, who is part of Tier Fund, and he's a sexual and gender-based violence program officer, and he's introducing us into another tool to address these things called transforming masculinities. So over to you, Luke.
Thanks, Emma. Can you see PowerPoint?
All good, all good.
Brilliant. Great. So thank you firstly so much for the opportunity to share here. I'm going to take about 4 minutes to share a program that we are really excited about. So lots of years work into 4 minutes, but hopefully we can get through enough. So I am representing Tier Fund, and of course that includes our staff and our partners and our community members and our faith leaders. So I will do my best to represent, yeah, from them as well. So Tier Fund, we are a Christian faith-based organisation working in around 50 countries in the world. Our expertise are working with churches and Christian networks, but increasingly interfaith work as well. So I'd like to share with you the Masculinities, Faith and Peace is based on one of our core masculinities program called Transforming Masculinities. We have established resources for this, a 2-page quick guide, a 70-page implementation guide, a manual for training faith leaders to reflect on their understandings of scriptures and the religious texts and social norms, as well as a manual for community dialogues, which are conversations in communities running over 6 to 9 weeks. So this is a norms shifting intervention, which primarily focuses on gender equality, reducing IPV, and can be adapted to include other elements. So why masculinities, faith and peace? And why am I sharing this particular adaptation with you? So Masculinities, Faith and Peace was developed in Plateau State in Nigeria, where there are high rates of intimate partner violence and where religion has been used to uphold gender inequality and intimate partner violence. The social norms that are present, we've identified, also uphold that. And we know that social cohesion at the interpersonal, family and community level are driven, at least in part, by social and gender norms. We've seen high levels of mistrust and interreligious conflict between the two primary religions of Christianity and Islam. We also included in this adaptation some work on family planning, because that was identified as a common issue across the faiths. So the core activities that we that are implemented as part of this are a 4-day training for religious leaders. Again, this is participatory. Faith leaders reflect on their own understandings of gender and of social norms and how they've been part of upholding or addressing harmful gender norms. These trained religious leaders then train gender champions, who are identified members of congregations, and these gender champions then run community dialogues, which are 2-hour guided sessions which last for 8 weeks. To start with, these are single-sex groups, and they are separate Christian and Muslim. And for this particular adaptation, what we did is we worked with the partners and with community members and with consultants to adapt the Christian resources to include religious text from the Islamic faith. And so we have 2 parallel resources, one for Christians and one for Muslims. And then at the end of those community dialogues, Christians and Muslims come together and reflect on the similarities that they've been learning and identifying together. Then there are diffusion activities, so that the messaging goes beyond the faith groups and into the wider communities. So they're the brief summary of the core activities, but the outcomes of the project. We have seen really significant increase in interfaith communication and social cohesion. We're really excited about this outcome. And in fact, we saw better results than we were anticipating. We've also seen significant reductions in rates of intimate partner violence in both Christian and Muslim communities. So we are really excited about that. And really, the faith leaders and the communities have recognized that while faith communities can uphold harmful norms, they can also be key players in increasing peace and enabling safe expression of belief and gender equality. Whilst Christianity and Islam are very different, they also have lots of commonalities, and both can promote peace and gender equality. I really like this quote. I want to...
Yeah, go for it, Luke.
Great, very briefly. I just want to share this quote, which is really just a summary of the program, that Jesus Christ is teaching about peace, and so is Muhammad. So by working in partnership with both the Christian communities and the Muslim, we're seeing really fantastic results and collaboration between the two. I will skip over the next steps, but there's a link in the chat if you'd like to find out more.
Great, Luke. Sorry, you had such a challenging timescale, but really great material for us to see and be a part of. Thank you. Is there any questions at all that have been raised in the chat? If any of my team would like to highlight that, that'd be great. That has come off. And we've seen there's some really good contributions from Musa Khamis. So he's in Zanzibar. So Musa, thank you for that. So I'd encourage you there. It's been a tremendous section where we've seen so many actors being involved in true transformation, and we really want to be building on this and not just be presenting the problem. That's been presented for long enough now, and we need to be able to see what good examples there are out there. So you can see some links from Sharon. She's also got some material there for you, and what we're going to do is put a summary slide up right at the end of this, which will contain a lot of the links that you would be interested in. So I think if with no other questions, I think you're all taking it in, and it's a lot of material, but really quality content. Thank you everyone for your contributions so far. I'd like to go on to the next section then. So we're at part 3, but certainly people are really fully engaging in this. I can just tell by the numbers just remaining with us as we really look at these important subjects. So in our 3rd section, we are going to be exploring empowering youth and women heritage gatherers. And our lead on this is a friend of mine and friend to many of us, Professor Maurice Tadros, who is a Professor of Politics and Development at the Institute of Development Studies. And she also convenes the Coalition for Religious Equality and Inclusive Development, which thankfully they abbreviate to CREED. But it's important to know what it stands for, which is why I always like to say it without its acronym. But Maurice, we're really delighted you could join us. And as ever with Maurice, she brings friends with her and colleagues. So we're going to have quite a nice interactive time where she will be the anchor woman and bring a really good dialogue on this subject. So empowering youth and women heritage gatherers. And let's learn more about it. Over to you, Maurice.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you so much for your kind introduction, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to learn and share along all of our intertwining journeys, and really look forward to your questions and your recommendations and your reflections. So as Emma said, I'm very privileged to convene the Coalition for Religious Equality and Inclusive Development, which aims to make development and well-being and poverty reduction initiatives more sensitive to the experiences of people who are socioeconomically excluded and also suffer from religious exclusion because they do not belong to the majority religion or because of particular historical targeting. And we do this through the approach of integrating initiatives in wherever we work with partners. All our work is undertaken with partners, and today I'm extremely privileged, just delighted and elated that we have friends and colleagues from the University of the Hook and the University of Mosul who have led a very fascinating initiative to use universities as a platform to help youth and women who belong to religiously marginalized communities, be they from large communities such as the Chaldeans, the Assyrians, the Syriacs, or ones that are tiny like the Kakayi and the Sabians, to be able to find at university a space for them to rediscover their heritage and communicate their heritage to others. So I don't want to take any more time, but I just want to start by introducing someone whom I deeply respect and I've learned so much from, Professor Rond, who is the Dean at the University of the Hook. And she will speak first, and then I will be introducing Dr. Varteen, who is at the University of Mosul. She's an associate professor at the linguistics department, and Professor Rond is also professor of geology. So I will run this in a talk show form, and I will, just as Emma says, just anchor, and you'll find it a lot more interesting to hear from them than from me. So I will start with Professor Rond, and then I will keep it this way so you can see both Professor Rond and Dr. Varteen. And if you can't hear my voice, just let me know and I will raise it. So Professor Rond, such an honor to have you with us from the University of the Hook. What did the University of the Hook do to empower youth who belong to religiously marginalized groups in the Hook and its vicinity?
Yes. First of all, thank you, Emma. Hi, hello, participants. This is Rent. First of all, I would like to talk a little bit about from which university that I'm coming from, where it's located. It's located in the northern part of Iraq, in Kurdistan. We have border with Syria near Aleppo, and we have border with Iraqi Nineveh. So during what happened in Nineveh and Aleppo, we received the minority exodus to our city. We received almost 500,000 of those people, a lot of youth, a lot of women. They were without any shelter. At the very beginning, they were just, like try to find a place in the constructions, unfinished building, under tree, under bridges, everywhere. But then later on, after like 3-4 months, they were started, this is going to be long. So they reached out to the University of The Hague for their, like youth or kids to pursue their education, and also for their daughters. So the University of The Hague, we made few channels for them, and we tried to accept most of them in our program for extra, we put extra work for our staff. And then after that, actually, we received many waves of these people from Nineveh and Aleppo as refugees and IDPs. Being in the project like CREED, I would like to thank University of Sussex and also the IDS for taking this opportunity to participate in this program. We collect the heritage of these minorities, and the people that the heritage gatherers, they are from the youth and women, and some of them, they are from the IDPs. They are Iraqi, but they are left their area due to the violence in Nineveh. So this is what I'm proud of, that this is the very first time in Iraq that people try to gather and document heritage under threat. So this heritage, maybe within a few years, it's going to go. So they made a lot of interviews with old people and people prominent in the society to hear from them. As a product of this project, we collected more than 800 interviews about history interview. And we gathered more than 700 topic interview for certain topic, like wedding, like grief, like any kind of practice, whether it is agriculture practices or religion practices. And also we documented more than 12,000 photographs and small video as a digital story. So this is great. I feel this work is original because nobody has documented such amount of treasure belong to different minorities under threat.
Thank you, Professor Rond. And of course, while others collect heritage, the distinctiveness of this, Dr. Vartine, is we were not bringing experts from outside to collect this heritage. You, as being part of the University of Mosul, like the University of The Hague, you were empowering young people from within these religious communities themselves. The criteria for joining the program was that you had to belong to this community. Professor Rond spoke about working with IDPs. These were Yazidis who were in IDP camps that the University of The Hague reached out to. So Dr. Vartine, as a professor of linguistics, but who's also from a Syriac background, can you please tell me, why was it important that we get youth from within these communities to collect their own heritage, as opposed to having experts from outside do this work?
Actually, because the responsibility is on the youth. The youth are responsible how to build their futures and the others' futures. So through this program with the CREED, it was a good opportunity and succeeded in how to encourage the young people to collect their heritage, to be more stick to their roots and not to travel abroad or to displace to another cities in Iraq, especially after ISIS invasion, because ISIS invasion had a bad effects on heritage gathering. but after ISIS invasion, the people became more aware how to preserve their heritage, how to be alive for the future generations, especially the women. The women had a great role in agriculture, in building, in harvest seasons. So through the interviews that been submitted by the young people, we discovered that women play a great role in their heritage. So it was the youth responsibility to collect and to gather this heritage for future generations.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vartin. Professor Rond, you noticed that there were changes in the personalities of the young people. You yourself, even though you are dean and you're responsible for a huge part of the university, you came into contact with them. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, thank you, Professor Maris. Yeah, actually the training that they sat with the IDS and then through our staff changed a lot of their, thinking about, they thought about their heritage, give them new skills that will help them maybe later on to find job opportunities. So now they are trained. This our youth, they don't have experiences. This is a great experiences for them. I see how they are confident in giving the speech about their heritage. And the most important thing is that this project put the different minority, which they are in conflict among each other in our area, in one classroom, in one workshop. And everybody is proud of his or her heritage. They were talking with a pride. I see the pride in their eyes. I was in one or two of these workshops, the different minorities, and they start to share their practices. Oh, we do that like this. And the other one said, oh, we do it, but in different way, and so on. So this is the skill that they share, and also the confidence that they gain through this project. Besides, this is an eye-opening for them. Eye-opening about their heritage, what their father, grandfather, and so on, they used to do. Before, nobody think of that, especially here in Iraq, where everybody, the main topic is where are you from and to which tribe you are belong and so on. So this is an eye-opening for them, and it changed the mentality. And this is also a kind of awareness for them to stick to their land, to stay in their land. So this is the main changes that our youth have through this program.
Thank you, Professor Rond. Emma, do we have time for just one more question to ask Dr. Vartin?
We would just, I'd really be good to just get some questions, but get some questions to them. Is that possible, Maurice?
Yes, okay. Absolutely. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, all three of you, for that sort of energy and just feeling like we actually have been into Iraq, during this time, because that's what's so important, that what you bring to us, and also just I think celebrating, but also giving the honour that's due to our young people and youth, looking at the next generation to come. And I think it's been really important what you've raised today. So I'm very appreciative of that. And so what I would like to do, if it's okay with everyone, is those of you who have shared already, just put your screens on if you're still with us. But is there any other questions that that would be good to ask? And I'd like to highlight this and see if anyone would like to answer this one. It's from Emily and Wilson. And she said it's interesting to focus on theological texts and faith leaders, but does that inadvertently reinforce power, dynamics and vulnerability of the poorest, most marginalised members of religious or non-religious communities? So that is interesting. So I think, Sharon, that will be interesting to hear from you on that one. And we've actually got a really great example between all of us of youth, and then we've got faith leaders and belief leaders. So yeah, Sharon, am I okay to put that to you?
Absolutely. I've actually just answered Emily as a text in the comments. We are looking at the most effective way of changing attitudes. We sit in, I don't actually, but you're sitting in England, in Europe, or in the States, things are very different in by far the vast majority of countries around the world, which and they're not, religious leaders there are usually not open to the sort of attitudes that we see in Europe and in modern society, more modern societies, I should say. The countries that we're working with are traditionally very religious, and the religious leaders there really believe that they are directed by the texts that they live by. And therefore, if we are going to try and see changes, or to try and change or open up attitudes, I would say, open up ways of looking at those texts, we need to build their trust. We need to discuss with them. We need to offer interpretations of those texts, which many people have already done, but to speak with them about it in order to be able to change those attitudes and in that way protect the vulnerable. And therefore, I'm really looking at the most effective way of bringing about a greater openness to the other. And that's why we look at those texts, because it's through the religious language that we are using that we can reach the people that we want to change the attitudes of.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sharon. That's a very clear reply and helpful. Is there anything else that people like to raise? Lily, again, it's open to you. If you would like to add comment, we've talked about sacred and religious texts and the relevancy of that within other belief systems. So feel free to add anything to that if you'd like to.
Sure. I think, as you rightly picked up on, Emma, it's a little different within the humanist community because of the kind of lack of us having a sacred text. The way that we come together on kind of to decide, or we have humanist values and humanist principles, but we don't have a text as such, and those principles are decided in a kind of democratic way that emphasizes kind of dialogue and debate. But it's not to say that there aren't problems of discrimination and marginalization of women within the humanist community. I think humanism does tend to reflect broader patriarchal values in society as well. There's certainly a slant towards having more men in leadership positions, but I think the way that we address that is yes, to have these kind of open debates with each other, to always challenge one another and always reflect on our values, which are grounded on kind of equality and on autonomy and the freedom to make freedom of choice. So yes, a little different within our community.
Thank you. Thank you
for the same.
That balance, Lily. I appreciate it. I really do. There's just a comment from Samuel Okanlawan. And Samuel, thank you for writing that. I'm just going to read it out. There is a need to begin to build fresh terminologies and word usage exhumed from the religious texts that will guide the younger generation, especially the children, that will counter the norms and attitudes accentuating belief identity-based violence and marginalisation. So thank you for that comment, Samuel. It's interesting the strength of theme coming about over actually the all three sections on looking at actually belief systems, religious systems based on text or tradition, and then versus the cultural norms of society. So it's very, very clear to see that interaction, which is very important for us to understand. I want to go back to Maurice and our sub panel over there. Is there any we've got there's questions haven't emerged too much yet, so is there anything else you'd like to add from your side on what's been said, because it is so good to hear of this generation being, as you said, heritage gatherers.
On the point of gender equality, I think we have a number of dimensions to this, because obviously the University of The Hague and the University of Mosul worked with people from very many different religious minority backgrounds, with very many different traditions and histories and beliefs. And the challenges were different. In some communities, Professor Rond was telling me that being able to be connected to a university whet their appetite for more education where that was not possible before. In some cases, it meant that women were accorded their own, because we give stipends, they were accorded their own independent income, which was very important. In other cases, it was a case of greater mobility, because you have to go interview members of your own community, which means you have to be out and about. So that was a way in which it provided opportunities for women who belong to particular groups where those opportunities were not always accorded historically. But as Dr. Vartin said, women in the Syriac Orthodox or the Syriac tradition were also very important in playing active roles in their community, which the youth documented, which was very important, so that we don't perpetuate certain stereotypes that because you are from a religious minority, then you are necessarily disempowered. And the young people that Dr. Vartin worked with were able to document very powerful examples from within the Syriac tradition of women leaders. And I'll leave it to Dr. Vartin to perhaps give 2 or 3 examples of what did the young people in your group document, Dr. Vartin.
Yeah.
You just need to unmute yourself. It must have muted as you did that transfer over. Brilliant. Okay, yeah, do start again, because this is a great question.
Yeah. According to the interviews, they discovered that there are many women, they have a good role in their communities, like in engaging within agriculture, in building, beside their to be a housewife, they do other works within their communities.
Thank you. Anything else to add?
I think we'll leave it for the to learn from the questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you very much, Reese. It's really great to have Dr. Vartin and Professor in there. Wonderful, thank you. There's great dialogue going on there, so do have a little look at this that's going on. Gillian, do you want to add to your comments at all? Yeah, so Gillian Dare, do you want to open up your mic and add anything else to what you've written in the chat?
Very much indeed. Yes, we have, apart from the Gender Forum working group, we have the Iraq working group as well on FoRB.
Please share.
And we share a lot in between. And so we are trying to do a lot of things in different areas at the moment, particularly around curriculum, cultural heritage, etc., which we're working very closely with Iraq's own roundtable on FoRB on trying to do. So it'd be really good to connect up to see how we can apply some of the things that you're doing to some of those communities. But also quite a few of the NGOs in the area are also working with Iraqis who are refugees in the region and have left Iraq. And it's really important that they don't lose that heritage themselves, because it is their identity in the new country. And I wanted to talk about, not so much now, but follow up with some of you, but how we can involve them more in the work that you're doing and the research you're doing, so that we don't lose that heritage for them as well.
Thank you, Gillian. A comment from IDS?
Thank you, Gillian. Yes, you're absolutely right. The role of heritage preservation isn't just for those in country, but also for those that have been displaced. I think the exciting thing is that the University of The Hague found a way of working with displaced youth, even when they had gone through a lot. Perhaps Professor Rond, you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, actually, we always try to include the internally displaced people, that they are the refugee, the people that they they left their place and they didn't cross the international border, and also the refugees, the Syrian refugees. So we have so many programs whenever we have opportunities, and we brought them also so many opportunities from outside. For that, actually, for the women and the youth, because most of them, they have, you know, like we call silent trauma. So we have now a clinic,
yes,
belong to our Institute of Psychotherapy and Psychotraumatology, dedicated for the displaced people and also to the refugees. And most of the women, they come to the university when they feel it is university and the clinic university, they feel confident to open, to talk to the psychotherapist.
Thank you. That's very helpful to know. And I'd like to follow that up with you so that we can do more work in a particular area. Thank you.
Definitely. And by the way, also the clinic, not also, you know, like all the time, they waiting for the people to come, because in our society, I mean, having psychological problem is a stigma. So the doctor, the psychotherapist, they go to the camps and they talk to the families to find, you know, to diagnose people that they need help. Thank you.
Can I just follow up on one point? Because my particular NGO, which is Mosaic Middle East, works very closely in the Nineveh Plains and in Mosul and in Sinjar. And one of the things we're working with young people is finding out that they are being pushed into joining the various militia, largely because they need to find a livelihood to keep their families. And that's drawing them away from their own heritage and minority beliefs. And they don't want to be drawn away. And we need to look at a way of bridging that gap for them at this moment.
Thank you, Julian. And I'd just like to add to that. Okay, I'd like to add, Gillian, just to add a bit more resource to that was mentioned earlier. The report on children and youth specific religious persecution highlights that issue. So, you know, we're triangulating a lot of our evidence here, which is very, very helpful. I would love I'll just read out Samuel's question in the chat because it's really relevant. Samuel, thank you for writing it and thank you for being a contributor to this. So he's working in a university environment in Nigeria. How can I apply heritage gatherings among students to counter religious belief, identity-based violence, encourage positive gender identities? What the project? Over to you, Maurice.
This is really interesting because for us, when we look at any community's heritage, like any society, no matter where they are around the world, they don't have to be in Iraq or the Middle East, they can be in Sweden or they can be in any continent. Any of our heritage has elements that enable well-being and heritage that is threatening to well-being. And I think for us, what we've discovered is that when we work with young people to discover their heritage, they discover things that enable them, but they also discover things that undermine their well-being, in particular areas to do with gender equality, but sometimes also to do with gerontocracy. And we've discovered that we can use heritage to fight heritage. And the way we do that is we find heritage from within society, from within history, that are empowering and that we use to substitute for those that are disempowering. For example, we look at a community's history, and through the discovery of women who have played very positive leadership roles, we challenge ideas, but it has always been so. No, it hasn't always been so. Your heritage has all of these amazing women who played leadership positions. Why have you not written them in your history? So how do we use heritage, positively enabling heritage from within our own community and substitute that with other heritage that is sometimes more circumscribing? And with every heritage, no matter which community, we will always find opportunities of using one to counter the other.
That's a great summary, Maurice. Thank you so much indeed. I'd like to just bring us to wrap up, and I'd like to highlight, first of all, go to the chat because there's a really good dialogue you'd want to read with Luke having replied to some of the things that Emily Wilson has looked at. So do look at that. I'm often copying and pasting from chats because they're often as useful as the presentations themselves. So I'm really grateful for what people have put in into that today. I'd like to thank all of our participants, both those who've presented, but also for you being part of it and your questions. But we have had such good quality contributors. So I'd like to thank very much Marie from the research in Danish Institute and human rights. I'd love to thank Sharon Rosen. Thank you to Luke Martin. I know Helen's not here, but we will extend her thanks. Thank you to Professor Maurice Tadros and to your wonderful colleagues, Dr. Vartin and Professor Rund. What a quality contribution. But this is still the continuum. We put this on because we believe that actually if we're going to be ready to have dialogue in the summer at the Ministerial and continuing to collaborate around the globe on these issues, we need to keep listening first of all. So I'm very grateful for all of you who have been part of this listening. And do put, it's not too late, you can quickly put a note up there if you've got an email that you want to reach out to someone. We made sure the chat was available to send private messages as well to make those connections. So please keep an eye out for any more events that are happening. If you're based in the UK and you'd like to join the UK FoRB Forum, you can look up the links to that and your own organisation could join. For those of you who are around the globe, you'll continue to be connected to us via other collaborative networks and things, because we are one in all of this. I'd like to close just with this, the end of the Declaration of Humanity. We will utilise media, religious discussions, educational materials, texts, and all other platforms of our faith or belief community to empower survivors, recognising the resources of our community, and that faith or belief can be a source of strength for survivors and a source of strength for the communities and nations in which we belong to. So thank you so much, everyone. Look at the chat. We'll just keep it open, the chat, for a couple more minutes, but we're very grateful that you're a part. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, for always being the most enabling convener ever and always being spot on time. Thank you. Thank you.
Real
Thank
pleasure,
you.
Maurice.
On behalf of all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And really looking forward to talking to you about.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Sharon, for coming in from Dubai, I think.
Yes.
And Lizzie, thank you for connecting. That was really great. Thanks for being part of it, Rebecca.
It's been fun. I've enjoyed it very much. It's been really interesting.
That's another level, isn't it?
Yeah.
Emma, I need to talk to you later because we've got a side event at the Ministerial too, and I want to incorporate some gender into that.
Brilliant. That's exactly. Gillian, what we'll do is why don't we do a joint working group together, or at least
Yes.
get you to we'll join up and then we'll have a chat.
We were going to have a joint. Well, we were going to have a smaller planning group.
Yeah.
The thing, and then go to the whole working group.
Yeah, let's do that. We've got that.
That's what I've got to try and set up, because they've got the others coming in on that. Well, I hope they will. Problem is Fiona at the moment is ill and has been for 2 months now.
Yeah.
So she's not been able to do what she does. I'm trying to pick it up from where she's had to leave off. But yes, a joint working group. Planning group would be really good.
Let's do that. Rachel, can you make sure that I don't forget that? Rachel is my ears and eyes of these things.
Oh, that's remembering. Well, brilliant. I'll try and find out when Fiona might be possible to join us, and then we'll have Salah from Iraq, and we'll have other people. Brilliant. Lizzie from Search for Common Ground is a member of the planning group.
Great. Brilliant.
So
That's great.
And I'm just about to get a new member from of the working group.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
good.
Catherine Thane.
Oh, great. Well, she's part of our group as well.
And the other big thing about it is I'm now sort of trying to lead with UK's work on FoRB. So I'm putting together a first program in week or in the next few weeks. But then I hope we can do a whole series of events during the year to get out to a wider group.
Yeah, that is, oh, that's great. Great, Gillian. Brilliant. Fantastic. Okay, well, it's good to work together.
Yes, we should. Thank you.
Yeah. Pastor Clinton, good to see you. Nicole. Pastor Samuel, good to see you live. I hope you got some good feedback. That's really great to see you all.
Yeah, it's a great thing to be part of this webinar, and I have learned a lot.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. I sit there going, oh my word.
I hope to be part of more. And most especially what I've learned about heritage gathering, I hope to start a project, something I'll get across to them, to the team, and to you too, if I start such thing. So I've been blessed. Thank you so much.
I'm so glad you were able to join us, and your contact stayed strong as well, both yours and Pastor Clinton's. So that's really good. Please. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to leave now. Bye.
Yeah. But bless you. Thank you. It's great you were part. Really great.
Thank you, Emma, for a quality webinar. And greetings from the point of Africa. The point of Africa.
Are you in Reunion?
No, I'm in Cape Town.
It's Cape Town.
Yes.
Great to see you. And he sent his greetings as well. Really, he would, as he would to Pastor Clinton. So yeah, it's great to see you.
But thank you very much. It was very stretching, very interesting.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
We had some really good people. Yeah. So yeah, it is stretching. But you'd love it for your academics, Nicole. I know you'd love that. So that's good. Right, well, we will close this now.
Okay, thank you.
You've got all the information you need, and it's great to be a part of it. Is that all right with you, Portia? Because she holds
Absolutely, this. That's brilliant. Thank you all so much. I'll end the webinar.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good to speak to you, Portia.
Yeah, thanks, Portia. Rachel, I'll give you a call now just to catch up, okay?
Great, perfect.
All right then. Pastor Clinton, always a pleasure to see you. Bye, Gillian.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.